Welcome to another episode of Foresight TV. This is like one of my favorite times of the week. I get to have a conversation on air with some of the most amazing people in senior living. Today, I am talking to Ray Braun, who leads the National Investment, I always say NIC, let me see if I can get it right. National Investment Center for Seniors Housing. Did I do that right?
And care. Perfect.
And care. Almost got it right.
Right.
Great. So we're going to jump into this great conversation right after this. Hey guys, Steve Moran here. Ray, welcome to Foresight TV. I think this is the first time I've ever had you as a guest, which is my bad. I'd actually like to start by having you just talk a little bit about who you are and how you became the leader of NIC and what NIC has done, and then let's jump into the conference and other things.
Sure thing, Steve. Thanks for having me on this show. I appreciate the invitation. I've been at NIC now since October of 2022. I was previously very involved with NIC when I was president of Healthcare REIT, a board member, and did a stint as chairman and helped NIC develop the NIC map data service. So I've been actively involved with NIC throughout my career. And think it's a great organization, and I'm happy to be leading it now.
Great. And so let's just talk about the mission of this senior living ecosystem.
So in general, our goal is to enable access and appropriate housing. We focus on capital formation. So we bring together capital providers and operators so that they can network and do deals together to provide more housing. And then we also view ourselves as the thought leader of the industry. So we do a considerable amount of research that's helpful to the industry. And lastly, we do educational programming. So we have something called investment professionals on the senior housing sector.
Two big conferences that take place. The one in the fall is traditionally the bigger of the two. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. That was historically the first conference we had was the fall conference, and it tends to be the larger of the two conferences.
Right, and this year it's in Washington, D.C., which
Yes,
seems super appropriate given the election by the time the conference happened.
Yeah, a little bit more than that, Steve, 5th. But it's going to be great to be in Washington. In fact, one of our keynote sessions is around the political implications for senior living coming out of the election. We have Chuck, he will be interviewing Mike Levitt, formerly the head of Health and Human Services. So that should be a great session and a great time.
So as you look at the industry right now, what are the things that you see as current headwinds?
So we're at a very interesting time for the industry. We have a very bright outlook. As you know, the aging of the population is picking up speed, and we have starting around 2030. So that's very bullish. Occupancies are rising since the pandemic. So we're recovering quarter growth in occupancy. occupancy. Operators have been able to charge rates that will offset the inflation that they're experiencing. So that's been very helpful for improving margins. So there's some really good the capital markets, particularly the availability of debt. So I'm sure many people at the conference are going to be very interested in finding.
So we come to occupancy first. So we're actually getting back to close to pre-pandemic levels. Is that correct?
Yep, we should be there by the end of the year across the sector. I believe independent living just hit its pre-pandemic numbers.
Okay, that's really good, and yet it feels like to me just sort of and some of it is just so much of it tends to be kind of almost below the surface where people sort of reluctant to stay. It feels like that if you look at just before the pandemic hit, there was a lot of optimism in the industry. The margins were generally really good. I think the biggest fear doing presentations about how we've been in this longest expansion we have. Nobody anticipated the pandemic. But I'm wondering, is that your sense too, that and which means that he may not have heard my question. I don't need a moment here before we try again. You know what? I've actually never had a new adventure every time, and there he goes. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about the NIC conference. I think that NIC is probably the single best place to treat. Capital is so important to the industry in terms of being the industry forward, and the capital people have some people would say an outsized influence. I think one of the things that I find really, really fascinating, and as I talked to this line with an operator this morning, there's some people who are really, really distrustful of the capital about money, and in some sense, that's a fair assessment, right? Because the capital providers are in the business of deploying of that capital, and so I get that. And yet there are other operators who I talk to who work with the REITs and the private equity organizations, seem to have a good relationship and seem to do a really, really good job caring for residents, and taking care of staff. And so we are, so I think there's tremendous opportunity there. And it's so much of it is like life that it's kind of how we approach it. It's a bit like how I see leadership and staffing. I see some people who are very distrustful of their staff, who believe that their staff is, hang on, I got to do a little messaging, that sort of distrust their staff. And what turns out is that when we distrust our staff, the staff will almost certainly live up to that, and they will be distrustful. And so I think that that's a huge. Oops, you're back.
I'm back. Sorry about that. My internet connection was disrupted.
Oh man, it is so frustrating when you do that in your middle of a live stream. Now I got to remember this brilliant question.
Where we are recovering from the pandemic and
Yeah,
operators. Yeah, so I think one of the biggest challenge right now for the operators is the labor market. As we all know, it's pretty tight across the U.S. and operators are working hard to attract and retain workers.
it was really interesting. I've actually got an article coming out about this, I think, next week. Is that Wall Street Journal put out an article saying that essentially the headline was that the staffing crisis is over in the United States, not referring to senior living, but that for the first time, the unemployment rate has grown above 3. It has hit 4.1%, which is the first time in like 2.5-3 years it's been above 3. And the other interesting number was that during the much of the last 2 years, there have been essentially 2 jobs available for everybody hunting for a job. No, I think there have been 2 people. Yeah, 2 jobs available for every people hunting for a job, and now it's like 1.2. And so I don't know whether that's being reflected in senior living. Do you have any thoughts on that?
So it's clearly not as bad as it was 2 years ago, and operators are starting to get more labor back into their buildings, but it's still a challenge for the operators to maintain the right people in the right positions.
So what else besides looking at the politics? What else can we expect out of the conference?
So we have Diane Swank. She is the chief economist at KPMG, and she is going to be providing an economic update. And that will be shortly after the FMOC meeting in September. So my guess is there'll be a lot to talk about around interest rates and monetary policy at that time. And she'll also, get into fiscal policy and the regulatory environment around banks.
So I'm going to ask a hard question that you may decide you don't want to weigh in on. So we're going to try it and see. Who's going to be better? Preface it by I had Mark Parkinson from in Cal a few weeks on, and we had this conversation. At that point in time, it looked like it was still going to be Biden, and one of the things, he self-described a moderate Democrat, pointed out that Trump was better, at least for nursing homes, than Biden is.
You know what? I'm going to pass on that one and maintain the non-advocacy role of NIC and our unbiased view of.
Very good. So one of the research projects that's ongoing right now that I'm really fascinated with is you've started taking a look at some longevity numbers for people living in senior living. And I'm hoping you can maybe talk a little bit about what you found and what we might be expecting maybe at the fall conference. I don't know whether we're going to see more data.
Yes. So we've embarked upon a year-long set of studies with NORC at the University of Chicago. And the first study looked at frailty levels. Then we looked at access to physicians. We looked at longevity and health outcomes. And in general, senior housing did very well on all those different studies and provided a great setting for people for their aging. Right now, NORC is in the middle of quantifying the cost savings to Medicare for people living in seniors housing. And that will be a very exciting study to release at the fall conference so that we can actually see the economic benefits that senior housing offers to the healthcare system. So we're excited to be releasing that report in conjunction.
So that more and more convinced that senior living needs to be seen as a part of the healthcare continuum. I think it has the potential to save billions of dollars really excited to hear that. And I'm assuming there are going to be some value-based care kinds of conversations.
Around the care component of senior housing and care. And interestingly enough, we had our spring conference program committee meeting this week in Chicago, and we are planning several value-based care sessions for the spring conference.
Terrific. So, if you want to, so and when? Occupancy, 90% occupancy as an industry?
Given the slow growth in inventory and the large incoming demographic population, I could see us getting to 90% once again.
Right. I have a steak dinner on the table for the industry occupancy level with Adam Kaplan. I hope you're listening, Adam. That if the industry is at 90% by the end of this year, I owe him a steak dinner. And if it's not, he owes me a tofu dinner since I'm vegetarian. I think right now I'm going to probably win that bet. So I'm maybe I could collect when I'm at NIC. I'm going to have to ask him. That'd be close enough, right?
There's some good steakhouses there. I don't know about the tofu menu though.
Yeah, I don't know about the tofu menu either. Anything else at the conference we should be looking at?
So generally, the conference will be also talking about typical things we do at a NIC conference. So there'll be a session on the state of the capital markets and valuations. And I think that's one the audience will find very interesting. We'll have some active adult sessions this year. As you know, active adult is becoming increasingly popular and growing. So we'll have a session on our main stage exploring active adult, as well as an innovation lab that helps people understand how to develop active adult. We're going to do a couple tech sessions. One session will be the roadmap for integrated technology and senior housing properties. And then we're going to do a innovation lab with a workshop around resident-based technology. So I think the audience will find all those very compelling topics.
Is AI involved in any of that?
Yeah, there'll be a little bit of AI. You can't do a conference without AI these days. Yeah. So that'll be part of the dialogue.
Yeah, it's interesting to me that it felt like at the beginning, before in last year, it was robots, and I don't think I've heard anything about robots on data. So it's a very interesting shift to me, and I think the AI has continued. People try to figure it out, but it has great potential. So as you do a long time, and what do you? Actually, I'm going to go a different direction first.
Okay.
There's a lot of talk about we baby boomers, and we are going to want something very different. I'm about in the middle of the 8 or 10 years away from sort of thinking about it seriously. As you look at if you were to go back, let's say that some magic wizard came along and made you the CEO of a senior living operating company. Given your experience and what you've seen and how you see the boomers, what would you do to create an amazing senior living experience for people? So
boomer preferences are a common topic nowadays because people are getting ready for the influx of boomers into seniors housing. And generally, they're going to want more services, healthcare services brought to them in their home. So I think we need to embrace that and make sure that we're providing convenient access to boomers. They're also very oriented around wellness. So implementing wellness programs that will help them have greater purpose and extend the useful life of their purpose will be important as well.
Yeah. And so do you see that as costing more or just thinking about it differently?
So I think the access to healthcare is about thinking about it differently and making it convenient for people to have healthcare in their home. On the wellness front, it's probably rethinking many of the things that contribute to wellness, such as dining services and nutrition. What's the fitness center look like and what types of activities will be done there? So there may be incremental costs, but I think it can be done with the existing infrastructure.
Okay, terrific. One of the things I hear, I've got a fair number of residents who are readers and followers. They mostly tend to be people who are in CCRCs, less so assisted living, and families with people in assisted living or memory care. But one of the things I continue to hear from residents is they feel like they don't have enough voice in programming. And so I don't know if you have any thoughts about how the industry is more focused on listening to what the residents. I was actually talking to a resident earlier this morning, who was telling the story about how his organization, where he lives, went through a big tech initiative, and they internally decided on new ways of doing tech, a new tech stack, much of which impacted the residents, but the residents actually weren't asked about it. So are you seeing a movement towards paying more attention to what residents are thinking and saying?
Yeah, I think operators are increasingly focused on resident engagement and resident satisfaction around that. There's a number of technologies out there that help gather information about what it is the residents want to be engaged, and then using it to plan the activities for them. So I think the industry generally is moving toward listening to what the residents want and trying to get greater engagement.
Terrific. So as we look at this conference, one of the things I'd be really curious to have your wisdom on. My first time I was at NIC was probably 10 years ago now. And I remember getting there in the morning and with the session sort of starting about noon or 1 o'clock, and walking into this hotel with all these people, and mostly men, mostly in suits, and not really knowing anybody. And it was really scary. I was working for a vendor at the time. And in fact, I had a colleague, another salesperson, who was there with a vendor, and he went the same day at the same time, and he never came back. He was so intimidated that he never came back. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on how to, if you're either a first timer, or maybe you're somebody who's been a couple of times but don't like it very much. How do you make it a good experience?
So we do offer a webinar for first-time attendees on how to take advantage of the conference and integrate themselves in.
Okay.
We encourage people to begin reaching out early on to set up meetings, because by the time the conference rolls around, many people that you might want to talk to have a pretty full dance card. So we encourage people. We have an app where they can go in and identify people they'd like to meet and try to set up meetings with them. Look at the sessions that you're interested in and make sure that you're there with people of similar interest. That leads to a conversation. And go to the networking sessions. People are there for the same reason you are, which is to talk and get to meet each other. So take advantage of that.
Yeah, that's really great advice, because I think that one of the things that happens is it looks like everybody else is super well connected, and you feel like you're the only one who doesn't know anybody. And the truth of the matter is there are lots of people there who don't know anybody. One of the things, I don't know whether I've ever told you this story, but when I went that first time, I went back to my hotel room, and I was so intimidated that I had to figure out a way to get past that. So I set a goal to meet 100 people. And I did that by just counting the number of I just happen to have stacked business cards here, but I did that by collecting business cards and counting them, and I did make 100. And then for a couple of years, I actually carried one of these to keep track of the number of conversations I had with people. And it's actually a really, really super tool. If you come up, I'll bring a few extras. I've got some Foresight branded ones. And if you come see me at NIC, I'll bring some extras. And all you have to do is ask me for one. And if I got one, I'll give it to you.
All right, that sounds great.
It was really terrific. And so I found that I was typically at a conference, I would typically have 30 or 140 people. And it could be either a really in-depth conversation like we're having today, or it could be, passing on the escalator and saying, "Hey, Bob, great to see you. How are you doing?" Really made a big difference. And of course, the other thing I would just offer is that you got to be prepared for a little rejection. People and say, "Hi, I'm Steve. I'm looking to meet 100 people at NIC." And it was pretty good. But I had a couple people who treated me.
Yeah, I mean, what I caution people about around the networking sessions is if it looks like people are in an intense conversation, they're probably talking about a deal. And it's probably not a great time to go in and introduce around in the networking areas. It's easy to stop and say hello and introduce yourself.
Yep. And the other thing I would offer is you'll find that there are a few people out there who always welcome people into their conversation. I'm one of those people. So if you see me having a conversation with people, come on in and say hello. If I'm really engaged in something that's private, I will very politely tell you that that's not a good time,
yes,
but I won't be offended or upset. I'll tell you the other person. I hope I don't get. No, I won't get in trouble. Paul Moran is the same way. He is one of my heroes. When I didn't know anybody, I always knew that if he was with a group of people, and he was somebody who knew a lot of people, that I'd walk into that group and he would introduce me to everybody. And frankly, if you're somebody else who's there, I would encourage you to help people because it's easy for me. My biggest problem is I don't have enough time to talk to everybody I want to, but that wasn't always the case. So I just, it's a wonderful, wonderful place to be.
Yeah. And, about 10% of the people at the conference are there for the first time. And it's pretty easy to see people wandering around and go up to them and say hello and welcome them to the conference.
Yep. And there is a great first-timer networking event on the first day, right? That I assume will be this time as well.
Yes, we'll also have the first-time networking event.
So,
and we also have a number of students who will be there. So students are always interested in learning from people in the industry. So you can always reach out to the students and chat with them.
Yeah, yeah. And they need encouragement. They need to know how great this business is. Anything else that we should be looking forward to that I haven't already covered?
Around the conference, Steve?
Around the conference, yeah.
Yeah, I think we've hit most of the highlights for the conference.
Okay.
So
and then,
I'm really looking forward to the political discussion, the economic discussion, the update on the capital markets. Those are going to be great sessions. And then, as you alluded to, we're going to have some fantastic NORC research to share with the audience.
Well, and one of the things that I know that because interest rates are high, that new development has slowed way down, although there's still some happening. But it also occurs to me that there was a time before we had these, rock bottom interest rates where the rates were maybe a little bit lower than what they are now, but not a lot. And there was still senior living happening. Are you sort of anticipating that this is going to be a new normal?
Yeah, people need to reset expectations. And I think after the rate hike started happening, people still thought about the lower rates from which they're being hiked from. And now there's starting to be a realization that this might be the new norm as these higher rates, and underwriting is taking place with those expectations. So it'll change the math a little bit, but there'll still be a need for property. And I think there'll still be more development happening.
Yeah. And I still, I continue to believe, and I think the demographics support that there are actually enough older people with enough financial capacity to fill every building that exists today. And so part of it is just telling our story better, I think.
Yeah. So when you look at the traditional resident in senior housing and care, that demographic has seen an increase in wealth. So there are many people out there who still find senior housing to be an affordable option. And as you know, NIC is working on the middle market, where we're trying to develop models that will be affordable for people who are not qualified for subsidized housing, but don't have adequate resources for an extended stay in private pay. So that's an area that NIC is actively working on.
Yeah, I think it is such an important area. Ray, we are about out of time. I appreciate your spending time with me. I look forward to seeing you in person in, I guess, 2.5 months now.
Yeah, thank you. It's been great. And I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. And we'll see you at the NIC.
Perfect. I appreciate it.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks.